That winter was bitterly cold, with heavy snowstorms burying our small Midwestern town under thick piles of snow. I lived alone in an old, creaky wooden house on the outskirts of town. I remember it was a Friday night. I had just driven back from the local Walmart with a bag of groceries. After putting everything away, I cooked myself dinner and ate by the fireplace while listening to the radio. The wind was howling outside, but I was comfortably settled in the cozy, warm room. After washing the dishes, I was ready to go upstairs to bed. That's when I heard a soft creak from outside. I looked warily to the front door, but the sound soon vanished. Probably just a tree branch blown over by the wind, I figured. So I went upstairs to go to sleep. But just as I was about to lie down, there was another louder bang against the wall outside my bedroom. I jolted up, shaken. After nervously checking my room and finding nothing wrong, I was a little relieved. But then more banging noises came from downstairs. Puzzled, I grabbed a flashlight and carefully walked downstairs to locate the source of the sounds. At the front door, there was another loud bang which made me jump, dropping the flashlight. I picked it up and cautiously approached the door. Peering out the peephole into the darkness, I saw nothing but heavy snowfall. After some hesitation, I decided to open the door and check outside. But I was immediately blinded by fierce winds and swirling snow. I lifted my flashlight, squinting to see beyond the doorframe, but spotted nothing unusual. So I quickly closed the door. It's probably just something blown against the walls by the wind, I told myself. I went back upstairs and into the bedroom. Just as I was about to get into bed, I heard soft footsteps coming up from downstairs. Has someone come inside? I stood up anxiously, listening closely. The footsteps grew nearer, stopping right outside my bedroom. I panicked. Grabbing a baseball bat for defense, I shouted, "Who's there?" No response. The footsteps had stopped. I gathered my courage and flung open the door, bat raised in anticipation. But the hallway was empty, and the stairs were pitch black. I turned on all upstairs and downstairs lights, thoroughly checking every corner of the house. But there were absolutely no signs of an intruder anywhere. What on earth was going on? I was totally lost. Just then, I noticed the front door was wide open, snow blowing in with the wind. I froze in shock, because I clearly remembered locking that door. Could someone have actually entered the house? A chill went down my spine. This situation was beyond bizarre. I quickly shut the door, still gripping my bat. I stood in place, frozen in fear. It felt like a pair of eyes were watching me, like a predator about to pounce on helpless prey. Cold sweat streamed down my back and beaded on my forehead. I told myself to calm down. Perhaps I was imagining things after all. It was just the wind playing tricks on me. And so the entire night passed in a state of dreadful unease. At dawn, when the snow finally stopped, I worked up some courage to check outside once more. I was met by a trail of blood-red footprints in the snow by my front door. They seemed to originate from outside, coming toward my home, ending abruptly right at my doormat. I gaped in shock as a spine-chilling thought emerged. The owner of these red prints had stood outside my home all through that long night. The end of the trail resembled both an ending and a new beginning. A shiver went down my spine. I decided to hastily pack up and leave this dreadful place at once. I rushed to gather my belongings and quickly drove out of that small town. The bizarre image of those red prints remains etched in my mind till this day. And every time I recall that chilling experience, late at night, it feels like I'm reliving the horror all over again. It was the terrifying experience I had when spending a night alone in a countryside cabin during heavy snowstorms. I was in my early 20s then, just freshly out of college. Having quit my job, I decided to stay at my grandpa's cabin in the countryside for a while, figuring out my next step. I took a bus heading to the rural area where my grandpa's cabin located. By the time I arrived, it was already dusk. Heavy snow kept falling and the biting cold wind chilled me to the bone. I tightened my down jacket as I gazed at the fast backward view outside the window. When I arrived at the log cabin, Grandpa had already gone to bed. I tiptoed into the house, afraid to wake him up. I put down my backpack and looked around. Though I hadn't been here for years, nothing seemed to have changed for this old-fashioned cabin. The cracked wall panels, worn floor, and my childish drawings on the wall brought back all the memories. Feeling nostalgic, I decided to spend the night here instead of booking a motel room. After all, it's just me alone, why not experience some rustic country life again? So I quickly tidied up the place and hopped into my old bed, preparing to sleep. Deep night. Howling wind and heavy snow. I tucked myself tightly under the quilt when I faintly heard some knocking sounds coming from the other side of the wall. Still half asleep, I reckon probably just some tree branches tapping on the wall blown by the wind. So I continued my sound sleep. But soon there came another series of hurried knocking sounds, followed by one or two weird loud laughs that jolted me right up from the dreamland. I bolted upright, listening intently around. Other than the wind still whistling, there were no more sounds. Could it be just a nightmare? I wondered. But right when I was about to lie down again, bang, 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 knocks on the wall resumed. This time I clearly made it out to be real instead of my dreams. Curiosity drove me to get off my bed and tiptoed to the door to peer outside through the door gap. It was pitch dark outside and I couldn't see a thing. But the knocking sounds got even clearer. I grew vigilant, hesitating whether I should go outside and check this out. Something just didn't feel right. And then, a sharp eerie laugh rang out that made all my hair stand on end. That laughter sounded extremely freaky, somewhat hoarse, with a tinge of hideousness and insanity. It sent chills down my spine. I held my breath and peeked tremblingly through the door gap. At this moment, rays of moonlight broke through the clouds, slightly brightening a corner outside. To my astonishment, I spotted a tall figure of a man dressed in rags with a weird aura, lurking crookedly outside my window. The corners of his mouth were torn to the ears, revealing a face-cracking grin. In his hand there was some unknown object he used to rap on the window glass. Seeing his appearance clearly, I let out a sharp shriek. The man seemed to have heard it too and whipped his head suddenly towards where I was. "Who was that?" his hoarse voice shouted. I quickly muffled my mouth with my palm, crouching down to a corner behind the wall. Just then, the door to Grandpa's room cracked open. He walked out with a crutch to check what's going on. The creepy man seemed to notice Grandpa too. His eyes shifted and fled from the window. Seeing this chance, I also rushed out to follow Grandpa, checking what's outside. But the darkness made it impossible to spot anything. Still, for Grandpa's safety, I persuaded him to return to the room first while I stayed outside searching around. The heavy snow stopped for a few minutes and everything turned eerily silent. I picked up a few bricks on the floor as weapon, nurse high on alert, surveying around the cabin house. But except the snow-covered fields, there was nothing unusual. I waited for quite some time without seeing that freakish man again. Only then did I feel relieved to return to the room. The next morning, I deliberately checked outside for any traces, discovering faint disrupted footprints which soon got covered again under the freshly fallen snow. From this experience, I'm convinced my encounter was no illusion. That bone-chilling laugh and vacant stare still haunt me whenever I recall that terrifying man. I've never dared to spend nights alone in the countryside since. It was the most terrifying night of my life 5 years ago during a major snowstorm. That afternoon, I drove to a countryside log cabin located in the outskirts of DG County, planning to clean it up and stay for a few days after my dad recently passed away. With heavy snow falling halfway through, the road was quickly covered, forcing me to drive slowly. I feared getting stuck in the snow. By the time I arrived at the log cabin filled with childhood memories, it was already dark. I dragged my luggage in to find the place oddly empty and cold inside. I threw my stuff in the living room and went upstairs to fix up the bedroom. Finished cleaning close to midnight, I heated up a frozen pizza in the kitchen while gazing at the flurry of snow outside. After eating, as I was about to crash in my old bunk bed, I faintly heard a dull thud from outside the window. I vigilantly strode over to peer outside, but only saw shadows of trees wavering in the wind and snow. I doubted if it was just my illusion, when suddenly, sharp knocks on the window followed by hasty footsteps fading away came through. I was horrified, finding trails of cleared snow leading directly below my window on the outside wall. Someone was out there just inches from me. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. After the police dispatcher promised to send help, I locked all doors and windows, seized a baseball bat nearby and hid in the storage room waiting. I was extremely tense, as except for the wind, there was no sound at all outside. I didn't know whether the prowler was right under my window, but I was certain he was around. The terrifying waiting was amplified infinitely inside the darkness and silence. I gripped tight the baseball bat, fearing that man would charge in the next second. Just then, a loud thud came from upstairs. I twitched violently, as if someone broke in from a window. Then came hurried footsteps with noise of rooms being ransacked. I was utterly horrified, realizing the intruder was right upstairs. I crouched trembling in the corner, hands covering my mouth tightly, stopping myself from making any sound. The desperate waiting felt like centuries, and I even had the thought of giving up, thinking the police could never make it in time, with my life hanging by a thread. At this point, the faint police siren grew louder from afar. The rushed footsteps upstairs seemed to scramble towards the windows to escape. After several minutes, loud knocks came through the door. Still on high alert, I did not dare approach the door immediately. After a few more seconds, shouts calling police, "Open up!" came through. Only then did I cautiously tiptoe to peer through the peephole. After confirming the number of officers, I opened the door. I gave my statement to them still shaking. The police swiftly searched around, but did not find anyone. All the traces were covered by the freshly fallen snow, as if no one had ever come by. After extensively combing the area to no avail, the officers left, leaving me alone in the hollow cabin. It was pure nightmare. I never slept again that night. The next day I packed up and moved out of that lodge. A month later, the county sheriff informed me the prowler from that snowy night was caught, who turned out to be an unemployed man from a nearby town. I finally felt relieved, but the spine-chilling experience became my endless nightmare ever since.